Dr. Boyce prescribed the captain a martini. Yeoman Colt knows her stuff. And Vina chooses to stay with the Telosians. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton and Walter Koenig.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing our review of the original series Star Trek unaired pilot entitled The Cage. This was the first original unaired pilot way back when, before Star Trek ever aired. This was written by Gene Roddenberry, you may have heard of him, directed by Robert Butler, who passed away very recently. The date was, this was pitched, financed, shot in 1964, shown to execs in early 1965, finally released to the public on October 4th, 1988, over 20 years later. How you guys doing today?
Wow.
Good. I'm good.
That's
I
good.
just finished.
Yeah.
I just finished watching that episode.
What a relief. Yeah, but this was originally shot in 64, shown, rejected in early 65, and then they just sat on it, and it was released to the public on October 4th, 1988. What were you saying, Cirroc?
So this was done before Shatner was cast for the Kirk role?
Yeah, so after this was rejected, they tried again, and they recast, I believe, I'll have to look this up and everybody can check this out, but I believe Jeffrey Hunter, who played Pike, actually didn't want to do the second one, so they started over. In fact, Gene Roddenberry's original idea was Captain April, and then that changed to Captain Pike later on. And you may recall that Captain April, Robert April, actually ended up being an admiral, a character that was an admiral and is also popped up as an admiral in Strange New Worlds. Just for a little bit of background, Strange New Worlds, the new Star Trek series that is airing now, they've done 2 seasons of, is based off of this one episode. This one episode has launched not only the entire Star Trek series, but now a spin-off, Strange New Worlds, because obviously, Cirroc, you recognize Captain Pike, Spock, and number 1. So so Strange New Worlds takes place basically right after this. And this takes place, I don't remember, several years before Walter, you, and Shatner's and everybody's Star Trek series. So in the timeline of Star Trek, this episode takes place, I think, like 7 or 8 years, or maybe even 10 years before Star Trek, the original series.
Incidentally, I've heard it enough times that I've come to believe it is true that it wasn't Jeffrey Hunter who demurred on doing the second pilot. It was his wife. His wife told him, his wife told him not to do it. And it's one of those decisions, that maybe he shouldn't have listened to her.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's funny because there are certain characteristics of this performance that I can see elements of when I see Shatner doing his role. Maybe it's just that he's a handsome guy and, the camera loves him, but it's also that, there's certain looks, the tone and certain expressions facially that I thought were very similar to Shatner's portrayal of.
Well, that might well be, and of course, we have to look to the writer as a consequence. If you write the character a certain way, there are just so many different ways of playing that character. There's certain things that are going to be similar, and a captain is in charge. He gives orders. He has a certain strength, and if you cast very good-looking people in the role, one is going to remind you to some degree of the other. So Jeffrey Hunter came before Bill, but so you can't say that Hunter leached off of Bill Shatner, and
No.
certainly Bill had his own style, and it was always there. It was there in the Twilight Zones and the other series that he did. So yeah, something that sometimes the script dictates how a performance will be played.
Mm-hmm. By the way, can we just say to everybody at home, this is our first time recording with Walter here, the first of very many. We are trailblazing. It's what is it? 60 years in the making. This was shot 64 years ago. And Walter, you joined the original series like 56, 57 years ago. And we just want to say how incredibly honored and grateful we are that you are joining us on this historic journey to finally watch and review Star Trek, the original series. And everybody at home, by the way, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you're listening in, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We really appreciate it. But Walter, can you just give us a couple seconds on what this first step feels like? Is it weird? Is it scary? Is it exciting?
I'm a little bit anxious. You can't tell by the way I deliver the lines, but I'm long enough in the tooth at this juncture that I don't think this is as intimidating as it might have been at some other point in my life. It's kind of fun, Thomas Wolfe said you can't go home again. But Star Trek has proved over and over again that you can, that everybody can, that the fans who watched the show back when they were teenagers or they were before they even were teenagers, they can all revisit the experience they had when they first discovered Star Trek in one iteration or another. So, and it makes me feel not quite as obsolete as I might otherwise feel at this advanced age, having you folks approach me. Of course, the $50,000 you're paying me was also, very, very attractive. But no, I'm pleased to be here. They're not paying me $50,000.
I'm curious, Walter, what your first impression is of watching this basically the pilot. What was your first impression of it?
Well, I've actually watched it twice. I watched it at a friend's home, and then I watched it when Ryan put it on my machine. And I must say that my reaction, it was important that I watched it twice because it changed. My initial reaction as I was watching it was, oh God, this is so outdated and it's so primitive in terms of what they're doing with effects and the acting is and it's all nonsense. You got to step back and be a bit more objective. And when I watched it the second time, I saw there were some very good things about that were going on. The story is absolutely 100% Gene Roddenberry. It's exactly what I might anticipate from him, a story like this. And somebody pointed out to me the idea that that human beings or Americans, perhaps we can isolate it to Americans, would not live by a rule that said, as long as you let us live, we don't mind being under somebody else's thumb. We don't mind being dictated to. That's not America. My friend Stephen mentioned that to me. In any case, so I found it quite interesting. There was it's not possible to watch something where you have a stake, even if it's somewhat remote, in the project, because you've been involved in it at one point yourself. There's always some kind of competitive feeling that goes on. You know, did we do it better? Did we do it differently? How much different is it? Those things go through your mind, even as you're getting embraced by the story, and you're getting into the story. So by the time I finished watching it the second time, I was much more comfortable with the whole process than I was the first time. I felt yes, there's some very good things here, some very creative ideas, and things that had not been done before in the detail and with the perspective that they were being done on the cage. So I found it quite interesting and well worth seeing.
Yeah, Walter, hearing you say that, my first thought when I was watching this is, I wonder what Walter recognizes when he watches this. You kind of touched on it when you said this felt very Gene Roddenberry. That was the impression I got too. I'd never met Gene Roddenberry, but I was like, this feels very Gene Roddenberry. However anybody wants to take that. But Walter, when you watch this, obviously there are some things that you thought were very different than the series you worked on. But what did you recognize? What was that through line, if anything?
Well, certainly the telepathy was well done. I had not seen it that frequently on television prior to the 70s or 80s. So I recognize that as being, unadulterated science fiction and well executed. So I enjoyed that. Curiously, the guy in the blue outfit with the crazy eyebrows, that's the way I identified him when I was watching it. What? Yes, that guy,
Mr. Spock.
Yeah, but it was an evolving Spock, and I found that really fascinating. That Spock had not yet settled inside Leonard Nimoy when he did this. There were moments when there was a sharpness, a combativeness that he had learned by the time we were doing the show. He had learned to control. That was under control. Here it was still, visceral. Here it was still an angry guy or a person of rank who was dictating. And it wasn't as modulated, and as a consequence, it wasn't as, you didn't feel he was as balanced a character. That he had these moments of anger and of human harshness, and that didn't
emotion.
It didn't make you feel that he was totally in control. And I thought that was really interesting, because I wasn't in the first season of Star Trek. I don't know, and I haven't seen those episodes. But I don't know if between this pilot and when they started shooting the season or the second pilot, the character had evolved more, it shaped the character more. But I certainly saw a difference between this Spock and the one that I work with. And I think the one I worked with was far more interesting. The original Spock was just a guy with bushy eyebrows,
A bit more generic.
More generic, right? And as a consequence, he didn't have as much faith in him. He was more of a type than he was a character. But Spock became a real living character, and that's why everybody loved him, because he was somebody new. You might not be able to identify what it was in his behavior that appealed to you as an audience, but certainly he had found a dimension that he could make a character out of that was fascinating. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel that same kind of. I felt something different about him. I put hair is frizzy, and he looked a little rough around the edges. But I would say he's more Leonard Nimoy at this point than Spock. And
right.
I just feel more of a human characteristic. I don't feel him as a Vulcan, as an alien character at this point. I just feel like he's a human guy with pointy ears who's in the Starfleet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But Jeffrey Hunter did a good job, in my opinion, in this episode, carrying the load as the lead in this story. What do you think about his performance?
I think Jeffrey Hansen is probably, and forgive my hyperbole, the most handsome man I have ever seen.
He's a pretty handsome guy.
No wonder he got to play Jesus Christ. I know that he played Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
He's extremely good looking. And if my sexual inclinations were different than they are, I could go for him.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes, striking features, his eyes. I mean, he's a specimen of a man to look at, but he's also played it well. I mean, he doesn't just rely on his looks. He's bringing an acting performance to the job as well. Well, I thought he did a good job.
He certainly did a competent job. I don't think he has the flexibility, the emotional depth that Bill Shatner brings to the screen. And that's with everybody knowing that Bill and I are not best of friends. But I do know that he's a very versatile, talented actor. Bill is, and I didn't see that as much in Jeffrey Hunter. And he may have, over time, have evolved into being that kind of an actor as well. I thought he was, when you had Susan Oliver and Jeffrey Hunter in the same shot, you're looking at the Barbie.
Yeah.
The Barbie folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey
was
Hunter,
the set was this? Oh.
Sorry, go ahead, Cirroc.
I was going to ask about the set. If the set looked like it had, similarities to what you were working on, or were there upgrades by that time that made it look more, updated?
Yeah. Well, the two consoles that George and I sat at were more futuristic looking. These looked like desks with wire lamps. They weren't as substantial looking.
Yeah.
And so I did notice that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there was more of a play with the pyrotechnics in this episode than we frequently. It seems to me, as I recall, than we often had on our show. We were heavily involved with philosophical in a philosophical context with things. We didn't rely on the
pyrotechnics,
the pyrotechnics, explosions, as much as they did here. And I think part of it has to do with they wanted to sell the show, and they understood that they had to put a little bit more money into the pyrotechnics in order to embrace the widest audience they could. And so I think that was a conscious design on the part of the people who made the pilot. And yet the complaint, which I've heard time and again, is that the pilot was too cerebral, that it wasn't action-packed enough. Well, there was a lot of exposition in the pilot because it it was a fairly complicated statement they were making about giving her an environment that that she'd be comfortable in, and propagating the race and all of that, and that required a lot more dialogue than some of our shows did. But I thought it was all well done. It was not awkward dialogue. It wasn't where they say, well, remember when we had to go out here and do this and we did that? Do you remember that? Oh, yeah. And then we did this and that. I mean, that's bad exposition. They made it more organic, and it felt more like it was actually coming from the people. And not only were they giving us information, they were also giving us a sense of who these people were. And that's very important.
Yeah, we did get a sense of their personalities quite a bit.
Yeah.
Before we get too deep into the episode, I was kind of hoping we basically, this is all we get to see of Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Pike. He's got this gigantic legacy. 3 other actors have portrayed the same character, maybe more. We had Sean Kinney did it while you were on the series. And then we also had, I don't remember his name, Bruce something, who played him in the new J.J. Abrams movies that came out a while back. Yeah. And now we have, of course, the current Captain Pike in Strange New Worlds, played by Anson Mount. So I wanted to ask you, Walter, having seen this now twice, which is really cool, how do you think the original series that you are a part of would have been different if it were led by Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Pike, rather than if he turned it down, or when he turned it down and there was William Shatner? What do you think would have been the differences?
To absolutely tap dance around your question, I don't know. I never knew Jeffrey Hunter, so I don't know what kinds of things he would have demanded or asked for, what he would have felt comfortable with. My sense is that as the executives involved in our series discovered that Shatner was a mobile actor with and dimensional, and could do comedy and could do passion, and had a sexual sense about him, that they would have looked for those things in Jeffrey Hunter and asked more of him than they did in the pilot. The pilot, they said, I'm guessing, but be the captain, be in charge, be strong, and that's what he gave him. There wasn't a lot of humor, but the part didn't call for it. But I think in time we would have discovered whether or not he could handle that end of things as well. And being a professional and having quite a bit of experience as he had, I certainly don't argue the fact that he could have fulfilled the role, that part of the role as well. I hate to sound like I'm hedging. I sound like a politician.
No, I mean, but you're right.
I sound like a right-wing politician.
No, I mean, the actor's performance changes over time. They get to embrace the character. You don't know how he's going to settle into it. In this episode, he was actually, Jeffrey Hunter seemed to be less interested in the sexual escapades that Kirk would have been into, right? I mean, Kirk, I felt like he would have slept with the girl right away.
You'd be like, why not both?
Except that the script wasn't written that way. I mean,
right.
It always comes back, as far as I'm concerned, it's the script. God bless us. You have 120,000 actors in the Screen Actors Guild, 140,000. You have many directors. I don't know what the count is, but to my way of thinking, a series is only as good as the writers that write for it, and I will stick to that. Whatever.
Yeah, I heard a great joke about that, about a writer saying, when he was writing back in the day, there were only 10 good writers in the industry, And he said, now there's like only 10 good writers in the industry. So it goes to say that, it's hard to find good writing. And back to your point about Gene Roddenberry, I wanted to highlight some of the things I thought were good about thematically things that I see introduced here that become something that resonate throughout Star Trek. One of them is the biblical theme. I've noticed that the biblical theme, I believe, is central to a lot of what Star Trek does, and it kind of takes those narratives and branches off on them and questions them and recycles the stories and presents it in a different way. I think that Sisko character we mentioned about his connection biblically to his name and what I think his represents as the emissary, all of these kinds of things. But in this particular thing, Adam and Eve was one of the biblical themes, which was kind of expanded upon and twisted into a sci-fi story. Almost the collecting of people that sounded to me like Noah collecting, two of every animal before the flood. The other themes that were consistent to me were the technology and the use of it, the communicator, the beaming, all of these kinds of things, which would eventually become, the basis for what we understand as Star Trek, beaming people down the planet surfaces, using tricorders. That was also established here in this episode. Warp factor 7, just the fact that they have these different warp factors and levels. I thought that was also established in this episode. And also the merging of humans and alien life form on a ship, where Spock is an alien life form.
Right.
That's another thematically consistent thing. So there's a lot of things that I thought Roddenberry did in this episode that becomes the future of Star Trek. Ironically, and I want to say this really quickly, was that Major Roddenberry as the number one?
Yes. Yeah.
Man, was it ever?
I do have an observation about that.
Hang on one second. We're going to hop to our break, but don't lose that thought, because there's a lot to talk about with Majel, because that is like, what? There's way more to that. So we'll be right back, everybody. Stick around. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton and Walter Koenig.
Oh, hello.
Boy, this is... Whoa,
yes.
This man speaks Romulan. That was amazing. Anyway, let's jump back into this. Walter, you had some thoughts. Was it on Majel Roddenberry?
Well, it's interesting, and I don't know where I get this idea from. It may be totally erroneous. The length of her hair as a helmsman bothered me. It didn't feel military to me. It felt too casual. The long hair, I picture all the women with their hair pulled back in a bun or in somehow shorter. That would have been more keeping with the environment and with the other actors. So that was the only thing that that I really thought about as far as Majel was concerned.
Yeah, I thought other stuff as well, though, because I thought I agree with you that I did think it was a little bit too casual. Her performance in general was a little too casual for me. He just didn't really have that number one gravitas where you feel like, okay, this is the person who's second in line to command. So I didn't feel that that power there or that strength in performance. So that's neither here or there. But I did think that it was ironic when the guest star Susan Oliver, in her line, which is written by Gene Roddenberry, in her line where she kind of is, saying it to be derisive. She says they'd have more luck crossing him with a computer, and
I didn't
referring
get that.
to referring to, if she were to hook up with Pike, it would be better for him to hook up with a computer. The irony, I thought, was that she ends up becoming the computer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I didn't
I
even think of
missed
that.
that.
That's
I missed
I
funny.
that.
mean, Roddenberry writes it into the pilot. I mean, it's just you can't make it up. So he certainly he has an understanding, and I've always called Majel, in my opinion, the Lucille Ball of Star Trek,
Mhm.
because how Lucy used to try to always get into her husband's band and
Oh,
whatever he
right,
was
right,
performing.
right.
She'd always insert herself somehow into the performance in the show, and thus she became the star of the show because of it. But that was the setup of her character. Lucy's always, fudging her way into her husband Ricky's, work. I always felt like Majel was that to Star Trek. Like, hey, Gene, what are you doing? I'm working on a sci-fi show. Well, write me the lead. I want to be the captain. Like, well, I can't make you the captain, but. And I always felt like that was, a responsibility that he carried. Whether
I
I
do
don't know how
know.
much pressure on that, but that's how I felt.
I do know, uh, for the sake of sheer gossip, that she became quite bitter towards our series when she started showing up on Next Generation. She praised it uh, time and again, and became rather uh, upset with our series, and was quoted on several occasions to that effect.
Wow.
Well,
Yes.
and that, I don't want to bash her because I love her and I thought she was very lovely to me when I interacted with her. So I have nothing bad to say about her. But again, I'm just commenting on Gene's own words in the script, which he
Sure.
uses to describe her. And in the script, or at least her character in the script, he says. With the alien is referring to her as potential host for Pike, and he says, "Number one has fantasies, but she lacks emotions." And I thought, well, that's Gene's interpretation of her. And then he
Mhm.
actually goes on to say the lack of emotions is a false exterior. It's not true. That it's just something that she wears externally. And then the other derision came for the other officer. What was her name?
Colt. Yeoman
Holt.
Colt. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeoman Colt.
Yeoman Colt. When he says uh, she has unusually strong female drives, and I was like, and she does this whole like, oh, you got me kind
Sounds
of
like a
roll of the
Betazoid.
eye.
You know, I wanted to say though about that a little bit of information on Major Roddenberry and Leonard Nimoy is that they were the first two cast. Uh, Majel was first. Gene Roddenberry apparently wanted, this Star Trek show, and he wanted her to be the first officer. That's where he started. And then he wanted Leonard Nimoy to play Spock. And then eventually he came up with a character called Captain Robert April because he knew he was going to need a captain, obviously, on a ship. But the reason he started with Majel and then secondarily Leonard and created characters for them is because they all worked together on a show or a movie called The Lieutenant. I don't know what that was exactly, but so he
I
already
do.
knew them. There was already a relationship there. What was it, Walter?
It was a series about a lieutenant in the army, played by Gary Lockwood, who ended up, guesting on a Star Trek.
Gary Lockwood. No way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
doesn't he play that alien with the mind? What's the name? I saw that episode actually on the cruise of all things, but I saw Gary Lockwood in that
Cool.
episode. Yes, but he's a great actor.
Gary Lockwood and Keir Delay were the two astronauts in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, And so what was my point? I don't remember my point.
He was Gary Mitchell, by the way, Cirroc,
Yeah.
in Star Trek.
Okay.
Yeah, see, he was the lead. Gene produced the show. Gary Lockwood was the lead. I did an episode. Leonard did an episode. Nichelle did an episode. And I think Jimmy Doohan did an episode of The Lieutenant. All coincidentally, because none of us at that point had anything to do with Star Trek because there was no Star Trek. But Joe D'Augusta, who was the casting director on Star Trek, was also the casting director on The Lieutenant, I believe. And he was responsible for bringing us all over to Star Trek after having appeared on The Lieutenant.
Wow.
So there's that.
That's amazing. That a similar story to that is the television series that aired that was called Roots.
And,
with LeVar
Burton.
And with LeVar Burton. I mean, so many people came out of Roots. Tim Russ came out of Roots, LeVar Burton, Kate Mulgrew was in Roots.
Right.
Avery Brooks was in Roots.
I didn't know that. I loved the show when it was like 6 or 7 episodes or something altogether.
Yeah.
It was, I remember LeVar because he had the
lead
principal role. Yeah. It was a great show.
It was great. It was a great one of the most watched, I think, miniseries of all time, television miniseries of all time.
And Harv Bennett was involved in the production of that, and he became our producer on the movies. Did you know
really?
that?
No, I didn't know that. No.
Wow.
I'm almost positive I'm right. I might be wrong, but I think I'm right.
Hey, Walter, I wanted to ask you specifically about this episode, the lady that plays Vina. Her name is Susan Oliver.
Yes,
she had a fashion of speech that was different than everybody else's, but I felt like I recognized it as old-timey TV or she almost spoke like a fairy godmother on an old Disney show or something. It almost, to me, it felt a little strange, but I recognized it as a way that people spoke in older times. Do you have any insights on that or her as an actress?
No.
Blast. Cirroc, what about you?
As an actress, I thought she was fantastic. I thought her performance was great. And, I also thought that it was interesting because the stereotype or the trope about women, particularly in this episode, it came up with Pike saying, "I'm uncomfortable with women on the bridge," or something to that effect. And he looks at Majo and he says, "But not you, you're different," which is something that you hear when people are saying something racist. They're like, "I hate black people, but not you, Cirroc." It's like,
you're one of the good ones.
It's not a way. It doesn't make up for whatever you say, so it's not a good thing to say. But let me, past that point, I felt like during that time period, there was a kind of misogyny that existed in Hollywood, and I thought that Susan Oliver did a fantastic job of trying to break through that misogyny and still deliver a performance that I thought was able to carry the episode. It was her carrying the episode along with Jeffrey. But I mean, she really was captivating. She played the emotions of kind of being hurt and tortured, but also wanting to live this fantasy of the dream that she had created. There was a lot of nuance to her performance, Walter. What did you think of it?
I thought her performance was quite good. I thought that the ending was atypical. I mean, to have her turn into an old, beaten up person was refreshing in its different in the fact how different it was. It was not the happy ending, and that's one of the kudos I give to Gene, that he didn't go for the easy way out. He decided on ending it on a very dissonant note of yeah, she goes off with a replica of Jeffrey Hunter, but the image that you're left with is this broken, for me anyway. Everything else is an illusion, but we see the reality is that she's a broken person who is not attractive. I have a question before we quit, and I began to ask it at the very beginning, and this is for your fans, okay, unless you guys have the answer. And this is early on in the episode. There is a moment when two people walk away from the camera with their back to us down the corridor, wearing civilian clothes that
Yes.
is very, very contemporary.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, where the hell did they come from?
A
And
tennis
what's the
match, it looked
explanation?
like. My first thought was they went to a tennis match because the lady looked like she was wearing a tennis skirt. The dude had like a polo thing, because it jumped out at me too, because Star Trek is notorious for the civilians wearing some crazy space age, whatever, with bright colors, and we're like, they're Star Trek very often, almost always, shows civilians as wearing clothes that we don't recognize. But this actually stood out to me as well. When we see them walking away, I was like, whoa, did they just get back from a tennis game in the 1960s?
That's
Tennis
exactly
match.
my
Sorry,
point.
tennis match.
So you need to cull your fan base and get an explanation that makes sense as to why they were there, who they were, what the function was.
Right, because
I'm dying to know that.
Everybody at home, give us an answer to that question, because holodecks were not yet invented.
No.
So you can't say they came back from a holodeck program, because that was my first thought there. Oh, holodeck tennis match. But no, that wasn't invented. So that's, I don't know. Cirroc?
It was Throwback Thursday, guys. I mean,
of course.
You can wear whatever you want,
There's got to be an explanation. There's got to be an explanation.
I thought also, makeup wise, one thing that Star Trek has always been great at is makeup. And I think that those Telosian characters, when their vein was pulsating on their head, I thought it creeped me out enough to where I gave some recognition to the makeup artist who designed that pulsating brain head thing.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I found myself wondering how they did that practically, because we know Michael Westmore, who's been on the show in the past, the Michael Westmore, has told us how in Star Trek The Next Generation episode Conspiracy, how he made the guy's neck going was he just had a long hose, like a tube hose, and Michael Westmore was lying down on his back going and just blowing into the hose and making it go like that. So I was wondering if there was a similar, right, Walter? Yeah. I was wondering if there was like a similar trick being done, but just in those little veins, because I was thinking maybe there's a hose back there. I don't know. Looked cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. And, going back to Walter, when you said the ending where they kind of gave us an unconventional ending and she revealed to the audience that she was really this old woman who had survived this wreckage and, wasn't as beautiful as we had seen. Another great job I thought was the makeup on her, because they did age her well in this kind of a slow motion frame by frame kind of thing. And I thought the look of disgust on Pike's face when he sees that she really looks like that, I thought that was kind of amazing. He sold me on that performance. I also want to, he was looking like, oh God, I'm glad it,
like dodged the bullet.
No,
I think what it was, in fairness, was just the horror of like, whoa, she's changing right before my eyes. This poor lady is so damaged. It was a compassionate look of horror in his eyes.
Yeah, yeah. But another thing that Gene and Star Trek does, they give us these moral lessons to chew on, right? They always give us some kind of something to chew on, and I thought there was some moments there that were great. One is when Susan Oliver, the Vina character, she says something to the effect of, when dreams become, more important, you give up. You give up travel, building, creating, and you sit living and reliving other lives. I thought that was a good, poignant statement to make.
It is. It is.
I thought it was great.
It's the kind of thing that describes how people process becoming old. When you can't get out there anymore, it's certainly not spontaneous behavior to do so. you start to relive the past. When you could do those things, when you could be still adventuresome and find spontaneous joy in living, and don't have to resort to memory. And I can tell you that from personal experience.
Well, I can honestly say, Walter, that I look back at the past all the time with joy. Even looking back at childhood, you say, the good old days, or when you're a teen, the good old days, or when you're in your 20s, the good old, remember with the trouble we'd get into. So I think like that's just kind of something that happens all the time, and maybe more so the older you get. So I always have to just try to remind myself that, whoa, it's like I'm falling asleep on the job. I need to be making memories right now. I need to forget, hang on to those cherished memories, but you got to still keep making these memories now. Otherwise, 10 years from now, am I just going to be skipping this entire decade when I look back at fond memories? So that's why I think, just to bring a background, that this is so freaking cool, Walter, that you are joining us, so that when we look back at the good old days, we're going to be looking back at days like today. And I hope you will as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't help but, I felt watching the episode like the aliens felt watching Pike in those dream scenarios that they were putting in him. So they would eventually sometimes peel back the camera and reveal that it's the aliens actually watching Pike go through something. And so for the aliens, whatever he was going through was their TV. It felt like that was TV for them. And so I'm watching TV. I felt like I was the alien watching the TV, like almost this thing is playing out again as I'm watching it, as I am the observer. So that's another kind of irony.
Right now, the people at home are watching us talking about watching the aliens watching Pike.
Exactly.
This is too much for my brain.
It's amazing. So that's the legacy, how creative Roddenberry is in writing these stories that are really truly in the vein of science fiction, which is something that encourages you to think. It just makes you say, "Oh, okay, that's something that's interesting. That's a plausible thing. My mind can go there, and I'll suspend disbelief for a while so I can entertain this science fiction narrative." And I think that's what he does a great job in this episode. Had me captivated. The casting was great. The makeup was great. I would have liked a little more backstory for Spock's character. I feel like if you introduce an alien on the bridge of a ship, give me some backstory that he's a Vulcan.
Well, you know what it is? It's the carrot in front of the horse, because it piques your curiosity and you want to learn more about him. So you appeal to the audience saying, if you want to know more about him, help us sell the show.
Tune in next week.
Yeah.
Well, you guys aren't going to believe this, but we're already just about out of time here, which is nuts. But before we do that,
I hardly said anything.
I feel like we could keep talking about this for another hour. Honestly, there's way more to cover.
Yeah.
But before we go, let's talk about who gets the home run of the episode. Cirroc Lofton, in today's episode, the original series of Star Trek, unaired pilot, The Cage. Who do you say gets the home run of the episode?
I'm going to give the home run to Gene Roddenberry. For writing this episode, it was interesting. It hit all the notes that I wanted. It created some of the tropes that we're used to seeing in Star Trek. Some of the basis of a lot of the things that end up becoming, a regular common occurrence were started in this episode, in this script. So Gene Roddenberry gets it for me.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mr. Walter Koenig?
I agree. I think this was prototypical Gene Roddenberry. He delivered as he delivered time and again during this the 3 years of the series, as well as other writers. And I hasten to add that there are other brilliant writers who were engaged in this process. But yeah, that's my sense as well. I mean, I thought the effects were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The performances were good, but the innovativeness and the inventiveness of this story was really what I found captivating.
For its time, I mean, 60 years ago. I guess as soon as Cirroc said Gene Roddenberry, I was like, oh yeah, what am I thinking? Obviously, it's Gene Roddenberry. Like, he's the guy that made this happen. I believe he had somebody helping him write as well. I don't remember the fella's name. I can check. But yeah, of course, it's definitely Gene Roddenberry. This is his vision. This is his first try. And, it's if at first you don't succeed, try again. But this was that first shot. I also want to give a secondary shout out to the series regular type characters that didn't make it to the next stage, like Yeoman Colt. I would have loved to see her either in Star Trek, the original series, or in the current show that's going on, Strange New Worlds, that's based off this, or this blonde guy that doesn't even have a name. This blonde, I think he's like crewman number 2. How do you have like 15 lines and you're called crewman number 2? Because the dude was in every, scene. He had a lot of lines. He did some athletic jump down the rocks when they tried to open the door. I was like, whoa, this guy's showing off a bit. Like, he's adding extra. So there are a lot of things. Dr. Boyce?
Yeah, the doctor.
So they're introducing all these characters. And then when they did the second pilot, they only kept Spock. But anyway, so shout out to them. I hope they do pop up here and there somewhere in the Star Trek universe. Let's give a very special thanks to some of the people that make this all possible. Their names are Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, Eve England out in Wales. I wonder how she'll feel about the Adam and Eve stuff. Yvette Blackman Tom, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arukin.
Arukin.
Whoa. Titus Moeller, Dr. Muhammad Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anna Post, Anil O. Palat, Justine Norton Kurtzen, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, DQ, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, who made that cool baseball, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Live from Tokyo, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Jane Jorgensen, Henry Unger, Allison Leach Hyde, Julie Manisfee, Marcia Classic Schreier, Greg K. Wickstrom, Jed Thompson, Glenn Iverson, Dave Gregory, and Grandpa One, Tim Baum, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner and Jason Oken. All right, everybody, stick around. Isn't this fun? Stick around. We've got the free-for-all up next. A lot of those people we just mentioned are going to be here. They're banging on the door. They want to talk about this episode, and we'll see if they liked it. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule. This is the free-for-all. Walter is super freaking excited about the free-for-all. He said he's heard so much about it. He can't wait to be a part of it. Look who's here. Melissa Longo is here. We have Jason Oken as well. Allison Leach Hyde, great shirt, Abyssinian Kiosk. We've got Susan V. Gruner, PhD, also an Abyssinian Kiosk shirt. Wow, look at that. Double. We've got Eve England out in Wales, who I'm not sure if she was pleased with them mentioning her name in the episode. We've got Goldu Scott Jensen, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri. We've got the Dark Lord Chris McGee. We've got Mai live in Tokyo. Tierney C. Diekman, aka the Borg Queen, is here. Marsha Classic Schreier, a bunch of characters behind her, pretty cool. Jed Thompson. We've got Gregory Kenzo, Justin Weir in a cool science officer shirt. We've got Carrie Schwent in the cruise shirt, and Faith Howell, who's skeptical about her tech today. So we'll see if she sticks around. All right. First things first, you guys, there is actually an IMDb score for this. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
I will give it a 7.5, 7.5.
Wow. Does anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
Faith says 10.
6.5.
I'm going to go 5.5.
What do these scores represent?
7.3.
These scores represent what the users on IMDb, the International Movie Database, what they all, it's like a compilation of everybody's score from 1 to 10, and then it's averaged out, a weighted average, and the average, which totals out to be the IMDb score, is a 7.6 out of 10.
Wow.
Good job, Cirroc.
How could there be an
On the
IMDb
money.
score when the cage never technically aired?
Well, it has
It
to.
aired
in the
eventually.
People have
Yeah,
seen
Yeah,
it.
in the 80s it aired.
You're
Yeah,
talking
the
about
80s.
Yep.
this
It aired in the 80s as a
Mhm.
television
Mhm.
episode, not part of the menagerie.
Right.
No,
No,
as an episode.
1988.
Interesting. I did not know that.
That's
Okay.
And now it's
Special
on
thing, yeah.
Paramount
So-
Plus.
so you
Season 2
all-
of Next Gen, because of the writer's strike, they aired it.
Mhm.
So you all watched this as I was watching it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
my first journey through Star
Same
Trek,
exact time.
this was the first episode I watched of the original series. I didn't know any different.
perfect.
Oh, poor fellow.
In the 80s? I mean, Justin, you watched this in the 80s for the first time?
Oh, like 10, 12 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I watched it like 4 years ago. I was so confused. I was like, where the heck is William Shatner? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Melissa Longo, cool
Mhm.
shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
Please get us on the right track by telling us what you thought of this episode.
Yes. I thought this episode was pretty fascinating, actually, to watch. It was like watching a time capsule. It very much felt like a product of its time, but it also it was also very imaginative for its time. I found it interesting that it tried to push the boundaries of the status quo for back in the 60s, but it still had the lingering residual mindset of the 60s. So it was neat to see them push and pull against those ideas. So I thought it was really fascinating. I like that there are some themes that were set in the cage that we can see today in today's Star Trek, like the transporter pads. They don't really change. And so that was established in this very first episode. So I thought that was pretty fabulous. But I had a question. This rose a question for me that I pose to all of you, is that would you resist against being held in captivity, even if it was a blissful thing, or try to fight for freedom, even though life is difficult?
So marriage, basically.
I mean, that's
Or
the
the
big.
Matrix.
That's always the big question of freedom versus safety, right? Those are the two things that
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
always have our government balancing between.
That's a brilliant question. With the way times are going, it depends on the day, I guess.
Mhm.
I say freedom, 100%.
Circumstance.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit more on Things Left Unsaid, because that was kind of the big point of the episode in a lot of ways. Great stuff. Thanks very much. Melissa Longo. Jason Oken is here. He's got an answer, but he's got some things to say. What's up, Jason? What do you think of this one?
Yeah, I certainly have an answer, and we'll talk about that later. I mean, The Cage in itself is a very fascinating episode, and certainly it's a time capsule in many ways. There are, it is quintessential Star Trek. It's certainly marred by certain things of its own time, and it's in a way it's sort of a bridge between 1950s science fiction. It looks very much like 1950s science fiction, with a little bit of something new sprinkled in. I mean, there are themes and things you can carry away from it. One is obviously, do you fight for freedom? One is that is actually very, very relevant for the younger generation, especially the ones that stare at their phones and play their games all the time. And this is something that certainly rings true today, maybe more than it did in the 1960s. So that's something that just happens to be sort of the nature of humanity. I think when it comes to The Cage, I mean, obviously, since it was, I don't want to say a failed pilot, it was certainly a pilot that was ordered by NBC, I think, for reasons other than just, they just wanted to see if it can be pulled off overall by the studio to begin with. It wasn't exactly something that they wanted to see on the screen. And frankly, I'm not sure I would have wanted to see 79 or 80 episodes of this. But but it certainly gave us certainly gave Roddenberry something to work off of, and the rest of it. I mean, if you look at who was sort of involved in this, a lot of the main players weren't even around. I mean, certainly Matt Jeffries was there, Roddenberry was there, and Bob Justman was there in a slightly different role. He was an AD on it. But a lot of the other players, Fred Phillips was there for Spock's ears, but a lot of the other people haven't come in yet. So it really is kind of a fascinating thing to look at. And without The Cage, we wouldn't have Where No Man Has Gone Before or anything else. So I think from that perspective, it's certainly a fascinating thing to have, and wouldn't have the menagerie. So this is certainly a very important episode in the history of Star Trek. Is it the best episode? Absolutely not. But it's, I guess, essential Star Trek watching, if you will. Maybe not something to start with, but certainly something every Star Trek fan should see, where all of this comes from and the genesis of it. And frankly, even, we have Strange New Worlds today, and that's where it draws some of its material from, for better or for worse.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Jason Oken. Allison Leach Hyde is here. What do you think of this episode, Allison?
What I really enjoy about this episode is seeing where Roddenberry's original idea was for it, and how he had to pivot a little bit, to like, okay, this bit worked, this bit didn't work, so let's go this way and bring it onto TV. Because, when you're watching it, I missed all the colors. Like, it was very monochromatic. And so I missed all the bright colors. I'm like, I need those colors. So I'm really glad they brought those out. I really liked the colors on the women's costumes in The Cage. And they do use them a couple of times as we move forward. But, it's interesting to see how a television show gets thought out and produced. And with The Cage, we get to see those little incremental steps that went into Star Trek. And that's really cool to see. And Roddenberry put so much thought into this episode. I don't know if you noticed, a couple of the other characters had bandages on themselves, and Spock was limping. And this is all from what happened on Rigel 7. That's in the script. I'm like, he put that much thought into it that we wouldn't even... I didn't notice it. I've seen this episode so many times, but I noticed it this time. I'm like, why do they have bandages on? Well, that's why, because Roddenberry put so much thought into this to build this world that he's like, no, this was this is the history of this particular episode, even though it's our first episode, and he wanted to get that in. So I think that's really quite amazing that he did that.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. It was his baby. Thanks very much, Allison Leach Hyde. Dr. Susan V. Gruner is nodding in approval. What do you think of this particular unaired pilot that is until October of 1988?
Well, I can understand why a studio would not take the pilot as it was. But having said that, because of the pilot, he changed things around. And look at what we got. We go from this is a reproduction, by the way, to this. This, which I've never used as an iPad. I gave this to my mom. Think of what we have. Think of the effect that Star Trek has had. I have on pop culture, but forget the pop part. Think about culture. And that Roddenberry changed the crew. If he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have any of Star Trek today. Just look at what we have. We have so many iterations of this fabulous show that had an effect on millions of people. It's just absolutely amazing. And yeah, I could pick on little things on this pilot that didn't really make it until later. But at the time, this was astounding. There was nothing like it. When the first episode came out, I wrote it down, September 1966. I was 10 years old. And I can remember my dad and I waiting for that first episode and how hooked we were on the very first show. So all of this is because of the pilot episode. So even though it's got a bad rating and it's a little cheesy, I'm still giving it a 10.
Sue gets it.
A 10.
Very nice. Thank you very much for that, Sue. Lifelong Star Trek fan from the beginning.
From day one.
Eve England is out in Wales. She's not quite a lifelong Star Trek fan. She's sifting through it. What did you think of this episode?
Yeah, I actually thought it was a really solid episode, actually. I mean, I think it's interesting that I think people have given it some criticism over the years, but I agree with what Jason said. I think it felt very relevant today, and I thought it felt quite modern in its portrayal generally, and just the way it was all very clean lines, the set, the designs, all very slick. So I can just imagine how people felt about it when it came out, as Sue said. And I know that I did do a quick Google and just to see what people thought about it, which I don't normally do, but there were lots of criticisms about the fax machine. But when I thought, but there must have been a reason why they chose that. And when I looked at the fax machine was only invented in 1964 or around that sort of time. So that would have been cutting edge technology at the time. So it's very easy for us to kind of judge that. But if you think back at the time of when it came out, people probably would have been amazed by the fact that you'd have had this sort of printing facility on a spaceship. So I thought it was really good. I loved the stories. I loved the themes. I loved seeing number one on the bridge. Although what really frustrated me, and this is probably my biggest nitpick, was that was amazing when you zoomed in and she was there and she was, the senior officer. But then that was immediately undermined by Pike sort of saying that flippant remark about, he couldn't get used to having women on the bridge. And I just felt that it'd be interesting to go back and sort of look into why they may have done that, because it seemed like an unnecessary statement to make. But I guess it was all because it probably was quite new at the time. And I wonder whether they were doing that to please certain people in the production team. I don't know. So I'd be curious to find out a bit more about that. But yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I was dreading it. I thought it was going to be really dull and boring, based on our sort of TNG early rewatches. But actually, I thought this was way better than some of the TNG episodes we've seen.
How dare you? Thank you very much, Eve England out in Wales. Goldu Scott Jensen. What is up, Goldu Scott? What did you think of this one?
I'd like to start out with immediately agreeing what you've just said. Absolutely. So going from there, this is the first time I've watched this episode multiple times back since I was a kid, probably in the 80s when it first aired on TV. And we used to record everything on VHS and just watch it over and over again, like enough to where I memorized the commercials. that were recorded as well. And this is the first time I watched the where they souped up the graphics. I watched it on Paramount or on whatever it's called now. And I usually watch it on Blu-ray and watch the original airing and the original effects on it. So this was a much different experience for me. And I think actually going forward with the next few episodes, I'm going to watch the Blu-ray versions again because it just has more of a classic and solid feel to it. But yeah, I did love it. And I watched this from a different direction this time, knowing what we do with Strange New Worlds and the retroactive writing of these characters. Jeffrey Hunter blew me away. He was so tired and so angry and Point's just downright thuggish with what he was doing in there. He's is your blood red? I'm about to find out. And he's just like dragging him out of the wall and choking him on the ground. And it was so great all the way through. And I definitely got a lot of the set design and costume design caught my eye. I seem to remember it differently and not being as impressed with these costumes. But when they're getting away, they're getting ready to leave on the away mission and they're putting the coats on. I'm like, wow, this just really does look retro futuristic. This really does look like what we would have thought the future looked like at that point. I loved Smiling Spock, but my favorite part, absolutely in it, and this is like 1 second, you guys have to go back and look, right before Vina turns back to her real, what she actually looks like, that television gives the funniest side eye I've ever seen. It just and like looks away really quick. It's like he was about to get busted with the ramshackle job they did putting her back together. But and one last part that I absolutely loved, that I'm going to use this line at work from now on. Venus says this when they're inside of in the psychic holodeck and they're about to ride the horses and whatnot. She goes, "Have you forgotten about my headaches? I get them when you talk strangely like this."
Yeah, that was
so
weird.
My coworkers get ready to hear that because they talk strangely and they give me headaches. So
I played that line back 3 times. I was like, is that like some kind of like gaslighting or passive aggressive? I don't know what it is, but I liked it. It was funny. TJ Jackson Bay, he nodded vehemently, Scott, to when you said that. Also to when Eve said that it was better than some TNG episodes. What's up, TJ? What did you think of this one?
Well, I was just happy that Eve liked it for one, and well, two, the headaches line, I can't let that one go. Was her like trying to signal to him like, don't be like, I'm still me. I know what we just talked about, but I cannot play that game because they punished the crap out of me. So like, don't ask me those questions because I'll get a headache. And Vina seemed willing, not just to do that, but also to pretend to be someone who she isn't, just to live out that fantasy and have her wish granted of a loving partner, even to the point of, making herself an Orion slave girl, and, doing the dance and all of that. I'm pretty sure if Pike had said, "Oh, I like this one," then she would have stayed a Green One for the rest of her life. And that made me ask the question, would I, how willing am I to pretend to be, something I'm not, just to make it look like I'm happy, or I'm making someone else happy? And I find that that's a question that, plenty of people today answer yes to, and those, we call those people pleasers, and sometimes it's a struggle for them to break that pattern in their lives when they choose to do it. And so, I thought about that, and watching Vina pretend to be all of these, other people to try to make Captain Pike happy. I also looked at the Telosians a little bit different because, in addition to their motive of like creating a society to populate the planet, they're also kind of granting her wish, because she had that, the fantasy, of, a loving partner, and Captain Pike is who they found to fulfill that fantasy, even though they were willing to kind of, throw her away once, once that chemistry didn't seem to be there, or that their purpose wasn't going to be fulfilled through her. They were like, okay, here's a couple other women, we'll keep him and let you go, which is kind of mean. I also really paid a lot more attention to Captain Pike working this problem from beginning to end. As soon as he finds out he's in a cage, he's trying to figure out scientifically, okay, you can read my thoughts. What can I do to stop that? And so we see him acting a certain way, but that's not really who he is. Like, I'll twist your head off. I'm going to see if your blood tread. He's playing the part to try to fight off that kind of mind invasion, and I watch that. But in that, all the questions that he's asking Vina, he's really trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to get back to my ship? And for the longest time, and watching this episode, I just kind of thought that's who he was. But watching it this time, I saw a little different. Obviously, we have more Pike material now than we've had before, so that kind of helps me see him a little bit different.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, TJ Jackson Bay out in Missouri with Vasquez Rocks behind him. The Dark Lord. Chris McGee is here. Sorry for the giggles. Chris McGee, what did you think of this particular unaired pilot?
Well, I'll pretty much echo what a lot of people have said already, how it was so groundbreaking for television. It inspired whole generations of engineers to make the devices on the show become a reality, of course, and astronauts. So I take all that for granted. That is just, there's nothing more I can add to that topic. I will point out three little things that I found rather interesting in this episode. For example, at the very beginning, you're starting out this entire saga with a captain who's considering retirement. And I thought that was an interesting take on how to start an entire TV show where the main character is going to be considering retirement. And also, isn't he a little young to be considering retirement? I mean, I don't know, maybe retirement works differently for military officers, but he just seemed a little bit young for that. As we've mentioned in the chat there, I liked how they used the term time warp factor in whatever number, like 4 or 6 or something, which apparently was the nomenclature before it changed to, warp factor, whatever, later on in the series. And they shortened even further in the next generation and beyond with just warp. And then cinematography, I guess, and it was interesting, especially when after we're introduced to Vina and we see Captain Pike's face, and then the camera pulls back and we realize the Telosians are monitoring them and watching them through that little monitor. I thought that was a good little effect, especially for that time. As far as the some kind of things, there's 2 of them in this episode.
Nice.
This is all some sort of trap. Spock says, you already mentioned these earlier on then, I guess. And of course, Pike, when he says, I was in a cage, a cell, in some kind of a zoo.
Yes.
Lastly, my memorable quote, I've been doing this on Next Generation. Why break the tradition now? I'll pick a slightly interesting line, which is, you want me to test my theory out on your head?
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Chris McGee. We did not do this some sort of or some kind of. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Mai is live in Tokyo. What do you got for us? What do you think of this one?
I thought it was an almost hilariously acted pilot that featured the buttheads, quite literally. The inspiration for them was through the man behind the curtain in 1939, and then the Telosians came out in 1965. But I thought, despite the acting and the props, this episode starts what has become to be the norm for Star Trek, and that is that it poses a question. It teaches us something through the elicitation of that answer. And it's a pattern that for me has become quite familiar and I think quite comforting in many ways. I think the question being asked of the audience in this episode, as Melissa's talked about, is definitely one of, what about you? What would you do? Or simply put, how would you feel if you were in a cage, and how would you respond? I think that that's right on the money. I think she and I are synced on this one in a couple of ways, and I'll talk about that in a sec. I think that I'll answer that question, though, with the words of a well-known person, the Miss Bolcha aunt of a gal that I went to school with. And it's, in fact, someone that Melissa very serendipitously quoted earlier this week. And that's the great Maya Angelou. She says, but a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill. For the caged bird sings of freedom. And I think that that's exactly what we saw here. I think it's fantastic.
Beautiful. You're fantastic, Mai. Thank you very much for that. That was glorious. Tierney C. Diekman, I jumped on her as soon as she was taking a sip from her awesome Captain Janeway mug. What did you think of this episode?
Oh wow. And pardon me if I just randomly go into coughing fits. I'm getting over being sick. Hooray COVID again. Wow. I get to be the I feel like a babe in the woods here with this, because I admittedly had not seen this until literally today. And I don't know why I've held off on a lot of these episodes of the original series. I know there's some of that I don't know exactly what it is about bringing in an influence of not wanting to change that picture in your mind of things that you know so well, and there is so much here to pick apart of lore and things. But I'm very excited now to get into these. Gosh, I have so much to say, but I've got dumb sick brain. But this was such a charming roller coaster into old style sci-fi, which, you know, I love for all its faults, and I hope that everybody has their doctor prescribed martini with them for this. My goodness. It's terrible, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and I loved it, and I hated it, and I laughed, and I will watch it many, many times. And if you look just even slightly into this, my goodness, it has been pulled apart and thought about and detailed to the point of where the star system is that the planet actually is, and the ship that crashed just from this, and a matte painting and wax blue leaves that hummed. That's fantastic. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I can't believe I waited this long to finally watch it, but worth it. I'm super excited for more of this, for many more of these episodes.
Thanks very much, Tierney C. Diekman. Great stuff there. Marcia Classic Schreier is here. What's up, Marcia? What do you think of this one?
Okay, so I'm going to try not to repeat everything that everybody's been saying. First of all, the classic in Marcia Classic Schreier is because I also was there from September 8th, 1966 onward. And I never referred to it as the original series because there was no other series at that point. So when I sign my name, it's classic. So I thought this was very sophisticated television for its day. You know, there's the stories that the studio head thought it was too cerebral. I disagree. I think it was a fairly even balance of dialogue and plot lines versus there was action in it. I mean, not as much as you get today, but you couldn't possibly get any more action today into an hour episode or 42 minutes, whatever they are. So, but because they thought it was too cerebral, you know, they said no. And thank goodness for Lucille Ball, who made the unprecedented call of let's have a second pilot. I mean, that was not done, but thank goodness for her, because she really wanted some original programming on Desilu. So that was good. I liked that. I'm going to get nitpicky because, again, I don't repeat what other people were talking about. During the warp travel scene where there was no dialogue and you just saw the stars in the background, and Pike is standing over Navigator, I think his name is Tyler, and he's going like this to tell him what warp they were. I don't know if anybody else caught this. He was using his fingers to say what speed. I mean, the fax machine or whatever it was called, I disagree that it's futuristic. They come up with they're so forward thinking in all their other props and tools like the communicator and the beaming. I can't believe they would even think that they were still using paper in the 23rd century. And what do you do with that paper? I didn't see any garbage cans. Did anybody else? So I didn't buy that. Can't get used to having women on the bridge. Okay. It was 1964. There were no women anywhere. So, but thank goodness they didn't bring that into the new production of Strange New Worlds. They dropped that. As a matter of fact, I think the bridge on Strange New Worlds is more women than it is men, or people who identify themselves as women than men. So I'm glad they dropped that. Oh, and Dr. Boyce beams down to a planet to do a medical exam on the survivors. He has no equipment. He has no bag. I guess he's pretty good.
Well, he's got a bottle of alcohol.
He got.
So that's all he needs.
Did he bring it down with him though, or did he leave it on?
Somewhere in his pocket.
I got to tell you that the TV, the console TV that was in Pike's quarters, is the same kind of television that I watched this on in 1966. Shows you how old I am. Just going to end it there.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Marcia. Classic Schreier. Jed Thompson is here. What's up, Jed? What do you think of this one?
It is my first original series episode. I share that with Tierney. Melissa hit the nail on the head, and we'll talk about that and things left unsaid. I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you to Walter for joining us for this. And I have a question for Walter. Walter, was this the first time you had seen this particular episode?
Well, I saw it at a friend's house a couple of days ago, and that was the first time.
Fair enough.
I needed to see it a second time.
Sure. And then really quickly, was there anything from that production, the production itself or the set, was there any one little thing or couple of things that you noticed that either brought you back to that era or that you said, no, we should have done that better? I mean, and I know that you came into the picture, a year or two later, but real quick.
I didn't quite get the question. Was there something that I what?
When you saw it, did anything bring you back? Did you notice something in the production itself?
No.
Okay, that's fair. That's perfectly fair.
Great question, Joe, though. Thank you very much, Jed Thompson. What is up? Greg Kenzo, what did you think of this one?
Hey, what's up? I thought this was a great episode. I'll keep this kind of short. I know our time is valuable. That's not a comment on anybody here, by the way. Anyway, I thought it's a really interesting episode because it's where it all started. And it's why we're all here on this podcast, It's really the episode that was the launching pad for all the iterations of Trek since it aired nearly 58 years ago. Gene's vision of humanity's future, it's all here in this episode. The franchise, it verges down different channels throughout its iterations, the many iterations, but the essence of his vision, it resonates throughout. And I'll just leave it there. I have more, but it's just commenting on the episode, which everybody already did.
We look forward to hearing more about that. Things left unsaid. Thanks very much, Greg Kenzo, way out in Hawaii. What's up, Justin Weir? What do you think of this one?
Hello. There's a lot of points I want to talk about, but I'll pick a couple and keep it short. I would be surprised if Cirroc did not mention the Twilight Zone, because this felt like a Twilight Zone episode to me. It made me think, and it's kind of cheesy for when it was made, but it's a Twilight Zone story. It's classic sci-fi, which is awesome. Also, I'm going to keep on Cirroc for a moment. When Spock had a picture of the alien saying their brain is 3 times as large as humans, I'm like, that looks like a Cirroc doodle off to the side.
Yeah, I almost doodled that. I have other doodles. This was my first.
But I'm
doodle.
looking at their uniforms. Oh, awesome.
My first doodle for the Star Trek.
We got to do better, guys. Though we're putting Chekov to sleep over here. But their uniforms look so comfy that these are pajamas, and it looks like what they were wearing.
Yeah.
My favorite character, there was a young kid standing by the turbo lift looking scared shitless the whole time. He didn't do anything. He just stood there.
He just looked like he didn't know what to do.
Well,
that was an extra. That was not an actor.
Could have fooled me. But what I did like about this, I'll end with this, is that he says engage at the end, and they ended the episode on the humor, which kind of is classic original Star Trek, right? Like, let's add a couple jibes here. But yeah, I enjoyed this episode. It's not Star Trek as we know it, but it was enjoyable.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Shag840, aka Justin Weir. Carrie Schwent is here. She loves the Star Trek cruise. What'd you think of this episode?
It's a lot of fun. For some reason, the phrase that comes to mind is the first pancake phenomenon. First pancake, you sometimes can get a little bit burnt. You check it, you make some adjustments, and you do it again. So that's how we got Kirk and everybody else later. But it's still a very, to continue the metaphor, tasty first pancake. It's got a lot of fun things about it. For the guy, the extra in the back next to the turbo lift, who would step to the side and then he would step back and then he would step to the side again. I just was fascinated watching him step back and forth. My husband Eric's favorite line from the episode, and now it's kind of my favorite too, is when they're all on the turbo lift and number one and that poor young yeoman disappear, and Spock sort of leans forward and says, "The women!" Absolutely hands down the funniest line in the entire episode, I think. And I adore Majel. She looks fantastic in the episode. She does some incredible face acting when Pike drops his women on the bridge line. So we get a couple of hints of the moxie that she'll bring later to Nurse Chapel and eventually to my favorite, Waxana. But I could, as I am the way I am, I couldn't help it. I have written a poem for the episode, and since I do limericks for TNG, I decided to go back to haikus. A brave new frontier. Women on the bridge are cool. Over the top Spock. Every time Spock grinned, it brought me joy. And one other thing quick. This is the first time I've seen this episode since we lost Francis. And the first time you see the Telosians there got me right in the feels. I was not prepared. Those of us who have met him, we all miss him dearly because his Telosian cosplay was legit.
Yeah. Good old Francis. On the Star Trek cruise, he would show that off, and he actually won a costume contest once there for that Telosian costume. Faith Howell is here, and thank goodness she is. What did you think of this episode?
So I've seen this episode quite a number of times, over the course of my life. I have never been a huge fan of Pike in comparison with Shatner and Kirk and all of our beloved characters. But watching it this time, definitely some points from Pike got to me. Definitely, I understand that feeling of like, can I just run away from all this and just go do something else for a while? And I also liked what the doctor said about, you really can't. You really just have to face life head on or wither, and that's basically it. So I appreciate that Pike, especially it with a mind to the growth that maybe would have come in a character arc in the future. Maybe not being his best self. He's not the captain, the diplomat, the charismatic leader that we're used to from our other captains, but maybe he would have grown into that. And I wonder if, his dislike for women on the bridge would have been part of that change that we saw over time. So I kind of wish that we had gotten more out of that. I'm glad that we're getting Strange New Worlds.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points, Faith, as usual. Well, Cirroc, any final thoughts? Jake's final take.
Yeah, my final points are one, I also noticed the music in this episode. At a certain couple of instances, the music stood out to me. Another kind of characteristic or that we're familiar with Star Trek. The other theme that I thought was introduced in this that becomes common, which is the away mission or the away team, them assembling the away team. There was a little bit of kind of jealousy there, I think, from the number one. She wanted to go on the away mission, it seemed like. Alcohol, another theme. Alcohol starts in this episode. Alcohol is in Next Generation with Whoopi's bar. It's in Quark's bar. Alcohol keeps popping up, and it doesn't seem that far from the creator's own personal interest in alcohol, from what I understand. So I noticed that that's a theme that recurs. The Orion dance and performance that Susan Oliver did, I thought was excellent, and became also something that becomes the blueprint of the Orion, existence as we know it. So it's part of the fabric of how we come to understand them. I thought she did a good job of just portraying that, and the performance in this episode was exceptional as far as I'm concerned. And then the last thing I will say is one of the philosophical messages that Gene left us with in this episode was the line in which the Tellusians say, your race would destroy, or if your race would discover the power of illusion, it would destroy itself too. And I thought that was poignant because the power of illusion seems to be, what we're increasingly moving towards as we consume material, as we invent headsets to wear on our head and take us into alternate realities or meta worlds. And so we're actually convincing ourselves to engage in this power of illusion on a mass scale. And my question is, is Roddenberry right? Is that direction, engaging in that, a path to self-destruction? So, just a nice philosophical kind of note to leave us with in this episode. So yeah, that's my final take.
Walter, before we go, do you have any final thoughts on this unaired pilot that didn't feature the star of the show, Chekov?
Final thoughts. Well, I think what I go away with is the sense, and something that I said initially, is that this is definitely has the stamp of Gene Roddenberry. This is his creative thinking. This is his inventiveness. And there's enough twists and turns, things that happen that keep you totally engaged. And so I don't think of it as old science fiction or science fiction from another period. I just think of it as good, inventive storytelling, and a terrific departure for the series. A terrific initial episode for the series. I think it gives us the sense of what to look forward to, and I'm very pleased that Gene created this and that we got an opportunity to share it with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks very much, Walter. And thank you to Melissa Longo, Jason Oken, Chris McGee, TJ Jackson, Bayot Missouri, Eve England, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Allison Leach Hyde, My Live in Tokyo, Marsha Classic Schreier, the OG, Jed Thompson, Greg Kenzo, Justin Weir, Tierney C. Diekman, Scott Jensen, Faith Howell, and Carrie Schwent. For myself, Cirroc Lofton, Walter Koenig, Melissa Longo, and of course, Aaron Eisenberg. We thank you all for joining us. And until next time, always remember the 7th rule.